So welcome to Coffee Talk. This is a monthly training series that is sponsored by the Children, Youth, and Families Division. It is the third Wednesday of every month from 10 a.m. to noon, and we feature a variety of topics. Thank you again for being here, and I'm going to introduce to you Abby Ahern. She is going to talk to you about homelessness in Clackamas County.
All right. Well, I've faced enough adversity this morning. Might as well be some more. So you may notice that I am not Vahid Brown. My name is Abby Ahern. I found out that I would be stepping in on this presentation about an hour and a half ago. So I will do my best with the data. However, I have a ton of experience working with homelessness and working for the county. So for a little over 11 years now. About 9 of those years we're working in the Rent Well tenant education program for folks who are homeless attempting to find rental housing. In the last 2 years I've been working in the community development division as the Continuum of Care coordinator, and I'll tell you more about Continuum of Care as we move forward, but is the continuum of programs that address homelessness for Clackamas County. So we are going to get right into it. So I'm here to talk to you today about the status of the housing crisis in the county and then some of the efforts that we've been making to address that crisis. And there will be some gaps of things that still need to be done. So first, I thought I'd start with this presentation. It's a presentation that was actually created by Chuck Robbins, the Director of Housing and Community Development, a number of years ago, but it still pertains. And it helps us sort of solidify what causes a homeless crisis. So I'd like to start with that because I think we need to be on the same page as to why we have a crisis of homelessness right now, why we have a housing crisis. So, that went quick. So first, we're looking here at the growth in households versus permitted housing units. So you can see the bar graph is the permitted housing units. The line graph is housing growth. You can see how in the, I think I have a pointer here. Nope, there it is. You can see what happened here, right? A recession. In the recession, there was protracted growth of housing, building new units. So in that time, when you didn't stop population growth, but you stopped housing growth, we created a bigger gap in our housing inventory. So you can see it's picked up since then, but we still have this gap because there was a period of time where there wasn't a lot of housing being developed. Let's look at housing costs. We all know about housing costs. Raise your hand if you know somebody who's been priced out of rental housing. Okay, good, point made. So this slide just shows us what's happening on a bigger scale when you have those individual people coming to you, talking to you about these issues. So you can see the solid blue line is the rising apartment rents. This only stops in 2015. This is a little bit old, but you can imagine that continues moving up. Renter income has increased 39%, while apartment rent has increased 63%. So with this slide alone, you start to see what is causing this crisis. You can also see that home prices dropped quite a bit in the recession. They're working their way up, but they rose 16%, whereas homeowner income raised 22%. So generally, those who were getting into the homeowner market, we're doing okay with that. Renters getting into the rental market or being able to maintain their rent has not been going so well. So some housing terms so that we're on the same page. Affordable housing typically means housing for which the occupants pay no more than 30% of their income for gross housing costs, including utilities. Affordable housing does not mean that a program runs it or an agency pays for it. It's just a general term that any human who wants to rent a place, there is a level of affordability based on any individual or household income. So what we consider affordable is when each of us pay about 30% of our gross income, and that covers housing and utilities. Subsidized housing is a general term that covers a lot of different government programs, federal, state, local, nonprofit, that reduce the cost of housing to allow people who have low incomes to rent those places below standard market value. There's a wide range of subsidized housing. You have everything from the housing authority properties where you pay a third of your income towards rent, regardless of what your income is, all the way up to 80% of subsidized housing, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, but you're talking about people who have 80% area median income. So they have almost the median income, but a little bit below that. And sometimes subsidized housing is targeted towards that group as well. And it's a range within that. We'll talk more about that. And then you have fair market rent. Fair market rent is a dollar amount established by HUD, which is Housing and Urban Development, the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, that they determine is needed to obtain a modest rental unit in acceptable conditions in a general area. So we have a fairly local FMR. A couple of years ago, these fair market rent, or FMR, often doesn't keep up with your local rent increases, and it can be really challenging. A number of years ago, I think it was 5 counties in Oregon did a study. 8 counties in Oregon did a study. We came together and said, these FMRs are not matching what we need. There was a study done and paid for and submitted to HUD, and HUD agreed to raise our FMRs. They raised our FMRs about 28% when that happened. So our FMRs are not as off right now as they were historically. So we are generally able to find units that fall under that dollar amount that HUD sets. It's very, very challenging in this market, but we have been doing okay finding those. So now let's look at the metro region. We're looking at household income. So along the left column, you could say percent of the households in the metro area with that particular income. Oh, sorry, this is all based on households with 3 people in them, 3-person households. This shows the Clackamas County overlay on top of the metro area data. You can see it's pretty darn close to the same shape, pretty close to the metro data. So let's talk about some general housing statistics. So at last count, which I think is 2015 data, there were 147,736 households in Clackamas County. The average household size was 2.56, but the average household family size, meaning families with children, was just about 3 people. So that's why we're using that 3-person household threshold for some of this data. You can see here those numbers I was talking about. These numbers across the top are based on area median income. And you can see kind of how they're classified as extremely low, very low. A family of 3 at extremely low, this is the upper threshold. So below $20,160 a year. You can see how it goes across the board, and we'll refer back to these numbers. Keep in mind now, an average 2-bedroom rent plus utilities is about $1,450. That's average. Affordability, remember, is 30% of your household income for rent and utilities. Now, I did not bring my calculator, but my guess is that this 20 thou is not going to get you very many months for $1,450, assuming they're getting that money all up front, which they're not. So this is the cause of the homelessness crisis. We have a gap between what's affordable and what's available. Let's talk about who needs subsidized housing, because sometimes we start talking about people who we think are less than, or people who aren't trying, or people who the society kind of writes off. But these are members of our society. These are people who work. Sometimes we look at people who are homeless and we say, oh, they must not want to work, so they don't work, and so that's why they're homeless. And I really want to dispel that myth. What you're looking at here for 30% of area median income, people who live on Social Security income, so people who are retired, people who are disabled, people who were disabled from birth and never had an opportunity to have steady income, are making very small amounts. Full-time minimum wage work. So that's really important to think about. Full-time minimum wage workers fall in 30% of area median income, our very lowest income range. Those are the folks who can't afford housing. If you look down here, the amount they could actually afford is up to $500 a month, given the income. Remember, how much is a 2-bedroom apartment? That's quite a gap. Then you have this next rung of folks who, frankly, before the recession, this 30 to 60%, a lot of them were figuring it out. They were figuring it out. This 30% group, they were always struggling. They were struggling before the recession, they were struggling during the recession, they're struggling now. This 30 to 60%, the upper area of this group, they were on the edge, but they were able to rent. They were able to find a place and rent, and money would be tight, but often they were able to do it. With the rents increasing, they're really being priced out of the market. So these are a library assistant, an office specialist, 2 full-time minimum wage worker. So people want to talk about quote-unquote broken families, right? We have, oh, well, the problem is that we don't have kids being born into 2-parent households. Well, even if they are, they're still being priced out of the market if they have 2 full-time minimum wage jobs. Affordable for them is $500 to $1,000. Which you look at that $1,000 a number of years ago, it's like, yeah, we could actually find a place for $1,000 and maybe get by. Finally, you have this 60 to 80%, which to me is a little scarier because this is sort of my category. You have case manager and accountants in this category. This is the group who was doing just fine in the rental market and now are on the edge, and some of them are falling off. So you have affordable at $1,000 to $1,300. What they're doing is they're paying the $1,450, but they're cutting other things in the meantime. And that's really challenging for these households. For a 1-bedroom apartment, even, you see $1,200. So it's not like people can be like, oh, you know, we'll squeeze into a smaller unit. We'll make it work. We'll share rooms. We'll figure it out. People have already done that, and now we're at the next step. People have already doubled up and tried their best there. So let's talk about the housing supply. So part of the reason why rents are so high is because we don't have enough housing for the number of people we have. Not only do we not have enough housing, but we don't have enough housing in the right categories, in the right income ranges. So you see that 185,000 households in the Portland metro area are below that 60% AMI. So they're within the first 2 categories from our previous slide. 73% of units are market rate affordable housing. So remember, we talked about affordable just means it is within the range of affordability based on a given income. So 73,000 units are just out there. They're market, they're not subsidized, but they are affordable to this group. Some of these look these days like renting a trailer home or a manufactured home, which is really an affordable housing solution. So we're thinking really out of the box when we're thinking affordable housing solutions. 30% of units are subsidized affordable housing, which means there's funding, government or nonprofit or both, in it to make them affordable. And then that leaves about an 80,000 regional shortage of affordable housing units. So when you have people who can't afford the rent even as it is, not enough units to support every person in the population, and continuing rising rents, you end up with homelessness. So here's another look at the number of households in Clackamas County and their income. We're gonna kind of map this out for you. So first, this line shows median income. So that's 100% median income. This is 80% of area median income. That was our furthest to the right group. So you see that those below 80% are really mostly looking at the subsidized rental market. To find something affordable, that's where they're looking. For those making above 80%, they're looking at the market rate. Those are their options because they wouldn't qualify for the subsidized. So remember, this AMI, this is a family of three making $56,000 a year is 80% area median income. It's not a ton of money, but they're looking at the market. So this family is looking at a market rate rental. So you may not have seen that little gap pop up. That's a small gap, not really totally indicative of the whole challenge across the board, but this has always been an issue, right? We have subsidized for 80% or less. Market is really only affordable to 100% area median income. There's a gap there of folks who don't qualify for subsidized, but are really stretching it to make it in the market. That gap's always been there. We've always had groups that are not quite qualified for low cost or subsidized housing, but are trying to make it on the regular market and having a little bit of a difficult time. Looking at 60%.
Let me just add that little gap in there. I think you can probably hear me. Oh, for the video. That little gap in there, before we had the housing crisis, we had quite a few units that were considered affordable by accident. That means that they were older units that they couldn't charge the full market rent for. So they were affordable market units that was available to that group. But as the housing crisis got bigger and bigger, those units started to raise their rents because they could. That's the big difference between a subsidized and a market. Subsidized housing is locked at a specific income and a specific rent. Market raises whatever the market can bear. So over the years, that the people that used to be able to find housing affordable in that gap can't anymore because that housing is now overpriced. Sorry.
Thanks, Chuck. So now we're looking at 60% of AMI. Remember, that was sort of our middle group. And then 30% of AMI, which was sort of our furthest left group in the previous slide. So dollar amounts. Let's look at what's affordable for each group. So the upper limit of what's affordable for those in the 60 to 80% group is $1,320. The upper limit of those in the 30 to 60% group is $993, and then for the 30% AMI is $500. So can somebody point me to some rentals, 2 bedrooms for $993? That's the challenge. And it would be awesome if we had the millions upon millions of extra dollars we would need to really support all of those folks under the green line in subsidized, but we don't. So it looks like everyone's covered and that the gap is just between the 80% and the full range, but there's picture, 10,000 other little gaps in the subsidized side. It's a big challenge. And often when you're looking at what you can build affordably, it's when you're looking at the 30% of AMI or less, those are really housing authority owned properties and housing authority vouchers. Those are what's affordable for that group. Housing authority pretty much supports that group as they're able to rent their own places. The up to 60% is the target for new affordable housing that's going up. We call that, sometimes that's referred to as workforce housing, because remember, all these folks, to be in that category, they really have to be working full-time, at least one person in the household. And then up to 80%, you will find some affordable housing properties that go up to 80%, but more and more, as we're looking at building more affordable housing at 60%, knowing how desperate that population is, there is creating a little more of a gap between that 60 and 80%. Because those folks, there's less subsidized housing being built right now for that population because we're in such a rush to try to curb homelessness by providing housing for a slightly lower population. So this is sort of the housing continuum. It falls along the same idea as the continuum of care, but I'll talk about that more in a little bit. So if you look at homelessness to if home ownership is sort of the most stable type of housing that you can have, although we saw in the recession that's not always true. The first step is really shelter. Homeless shelter, the purpose of it is to keep people alive and contactable long enough to find a more permanent housing solution for them. So sometimes people think, well, we're having all these shelters and they don't solve the problem. Homeless shelters, the goal of homeless shelters were never to solve homelessness. They're to have a place to keep people safe, alive, and able to be reached while we work on other housing solutions that could get them to safe, affordable, permanent housing. Next, you have some short-term housing. Some of these are like 6 months. Sometimes we call this interim housing. Maybe 6 months, maybe up to a year. And I can talk about some of this more in another document I have to share. Transitional housing is traditionally 1 to 2 years of support, case management. Sometimes it's subsidized in scattered sites. Sometimes it's a individual building that people are living in to bring in case management. So that's generally enough time for people to take a deep breath, figure out that they're safe, right? Sometimes it takes people up to a month or two to even be able to understand that, like, this is a safe place for me to be, so they can start working on other things. And many people who exit transitional housing exit into permanent housing. The goal of transitional housing is to find people, is to get people to the place where they're permanently, stably housed by the end of the program. Permanent supportive housing is a type of housing program designed for people who really need a longer period of time to put things in place in order to help them stay permanently housed. Many people who participate in permanent supportive housing programs are really in a place where we don't anticipate them ever to fully be able to support themselves in rental housing. In order to qualify for these programs, people need to be long-term homeless for at least a year in a row, or I don't want to get into the specifics of the rest of the definition, but long-term, chronically homeless, and they have to have a disability. So for many of these people, the goal is to move into permanent supportive housing, apply for disability that they have surely qualified for but never applied for because it's such a daunting effort to make that application on your own while you're homeless, and and continue to receive subsidized housing and case management. Really, the goal for these folks is to find a different type. Once they're at a place where they can, they're a little more stable, to gradually reduce the case management and put in place a permanent housing subsidy that they can continue in affordable housing with the stability that they've created with their case manager through the life of the program. It's very common for people to be in permanent supportive housing programs for 5 years, 10 years. It's really dependent. People are allowed to be in the program for as long as they want, and they can elect for when they choose to leave the program. The sort of further along on the continuum are Section 8 vouchers in public housing. Now, these don't come with case management. These are affordable housing options with limited additional support. So these are long wait lists, often closed. There's many people on the wait lists. They've entered into a similar process as Multnomah County did a couple years ago, where when the wait list opens, they will open it up, and then they'll do a lottery of the names of people who applied, and those people who are pulled in the lottery get to be on the wait list. It's a testament to the massive demand of this type of housing that those wait lists are really quite long and often need to close because they're not able to pull as many people off. Now, there is some good news on that front. There hadn't been anyone pulled off the Section 8 wait list for about a year because nobody was graduating off of the program and because rents were rising, and so each voucher became more expensive, which makes there fewer vouchers available. Just recently, they're beginning to make some movement on pulling some names off. It won't stem the flow, but it will make people a little more hopeful and provide some vouchers to some households who've been waiting quite a long time for it. I'm going to talk a little bit about the point-in-time count. I just realized this says 2015 point-in-time count. So that is not our most accurate and up-to-date data. So I'm going to skip past that, and I'm going to tell you something about the point-in-time count and why I think I'm going to present better data than that in a little bit. So the point-in-time count, as you know, is an annual effort required by HUD, Housing and Urban Development, of us to count the people who are homeless outside. It must take place during the last 10 days of January, and we do it in Clackamas County every other year on the odd year, which is why you had 2015 and 2017 there. You can access data about the most recent point-in-time count from the county website. If you search Clackamas County Community Development, and then on the left-hand column, Continuum of Care, it's on that page, and you can scroll down and see that data. I always present point-in-time data. Point-in-time homeless count is also what it's referred to. Data with a caveat. We count for more time than HUD requires us to count. We count for a full month, but this is the end of January when it's cold, and we're counting people who are outside or in warming shelters. So, and it's whoever we can encounter in that period of time. Lynn Deschler, who coordinates the count, puts an outrageous amount of effort into recruiting volunteers, and our volunteers do an excellent job of getting out there and really talking to people and really having those conversations and getting the information, and people make a great effort and do a really good job. But point-in-time count is limited, right? It's who you're going to encounter in that month, who needs a food box, who goes to the shelter. If people are having family step up and say, you know, it's really cold, I'm willing to let you stay in our house, we often miss those folks. So it's limited. Another thing that happened, and I'll show you some of this data, is Vahid and Aaron Schwartz, who also works in Clackamas County for H3S, or Health, Housing, and Human Services, actually went out on the Springwater Corridor and did a massive survey of those folks who are living outside. And here's some of their findings. So the age distribution, you can see the 41 to 55 years, the highest population. That's also true of the point in time count. The duration of houselessness or homelessness, people use those terms back and forth. I tend to use homeless because I'm used to it, but I am working on transitioning to houseless, so we'll see how that goes. So sometimes people think that people living out on the corridor, they've all been there forever. All of them have been homeless, and they're just always going to be homeless. And this shows that there's, you know, some folks who've been there for only a couple of days, and some folks who have been there for really quite a long time, more than 10 years. So here are the reasons cited for becoming homeless in this. This was a really intensive survey. The reason I feel more comfortable presenting this as opposed to point in time homeless data is this isn't trying to cover everyone who's homeless. This is trying to take a population that we consider chronically homeless or long-term homeless and get some more qualitative data about what their lives are like, what their experiences are like. So you can see job loss is a big one. Loss of other benefits, being evicted, rent increases, domestic violence, physical illness, mental health issues, substance use. One thing that I know that they found from this survey that they were surprised about, and I found this too in my work, is the number of people who, when you really talk to them about what led to their housing crisis situation, they talk about somebody close to them passing away. So they talk about an uncle who owned a family business who passed away, and the business went down the tubes and everyone in the family lost their jobs. I've had somebody tell me that their mother and their partner passed away within a month of each other, and they were just done. And you have to remember that traumatic events like that, which I'm sure everyone in this room has experienced some kind of major thing that really knocks you on your butt, these folks don't have the resources backing them up. So when you needed to take a week or a month off of work to handle a tragedy like that, these folks didn't have that option. And they weren't able to get themselves to work, and they lost their housing. So when you see things like job loss, eviction, yeah, that was what happened, but what happened to lead to that is what we don't always get. And I will tell you, it's almost always some kind of traumatic event or multiple traumatic events that they just don't have the resources to help themselves recover from. Here's some additional information about, based on gender, the reasons for houselessness or homelessness. So job loss was a more prominent answer among male. Eviction was a more prominent, well, so keep in mind, there's always more, in almost every survey of homelessness, there's more men who are homeless than women. It's very common. So take these numbers with a grain of salt, knowing that there's more men generally than women who are being, who are answering the questions in the first place. But you can see, I mean, this probably falls along pretty standard lines of the distribution of people who are homeless. Look at this domestic violence one. I'm sure this is not surprising that most of the people who said they had survived domestic violence were women. But that 70%, that's, I believe, of the people who said yes to domestic violence, 70%. I have found in my work, working with the Rentwell program and the people who came through class and asking each of them if they had experienced domestic violence, I have found about 70% of women did answer yes to domestic violence, if not recently, then in their history. It is a major, major issue and can be that trauma that we just talked about that leads to homelessness, or that series of traumas, if you will. Right, Angie? Yeah, good. Working on my knowledge of the DV pop. So looking at this housing continuum, we have these other ones that we showed earlier, but you see that there's this gap, right? And we talked about these folks who fall in this middle area. There's no services, there's no programs. These towards the upper end of this area, limited resources and programs. So moving forward, thinking about housing, we want to look at first-time homebuyer programs, land trust programs. Those exist. I know the first-time homebuyer program out of our office in community development is traditionally underutilized. Market apartments, conventional home loans, tiny houses. We'll talk a little bit about tiny houses in a little bit. Tiny houses, I think, really span pretty much the whole line. There's even a tiny luxury house show. So, and then you have sort of your cottage cluster, which is an idea similar to tiny houses. So that's that PowerPoint. That gives some general information about what we're talking about when we're talking about homelessness. So I want to show you a little bit more data, but also talk a little bit about the Coordinated Housing Access Line, or CHA. How many of you have heard of Coordinated Housing Access, or CHA? Oh my goodness, yes. That's really good news. So for those of you who don't know, Coordinated Housing Access was a requirement created by HUD, or Housing and Urban Development, to, I know what I'm going to do. No, B. Am I typing B? Sorry. He told me if I hit this button, it would just it would shut off the projector, but apparently I'm typing B by hitting the button instead. Okay, well, we'll just ignore that for now because we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's talk about what Coordinated Housing Access is. So it's a requirement created by Housing and Urban Development, HUD, that every region, every continuum of care, which in our case encompasses all of Clackamas County, must come up with a coordinated way to assess people for homeless housing programs and to place them in those programs. Now, historically, I really wish I could shut this off because I did not even want to show you this, but I just keep typing B. Can you scroll to just the second page? So at least we're not looking at stuff that isn't actually accurate. Okay, cool. So we'll talk about this stuff in a minute. So you need to have a coordinated way to assess and place people in your local homeless housing programs. In the past, you would have, let's say, 10 to 15 homeless housing programs. They'd each have their own process for people getting into their program. Some of them had specific referral sources. Some of them had nominating committees. Some of them had some sort of evaluation or scoring process to determine if someone would get into their program. And so there were all these different ways to put people in your programs and all these different phone numbers to call to do that. And coordinated entry, or how we call it locally, Coordinated Housing Access, consolidated all of that. So there's one phone number to call. And now I'm looking for somebody who would know the phone number. Somebody know it off the top? Oh, yes, there's Lauren. So it's 503-655-8575. Thank you to Lauren, our CHA specialist, who will be talking to you if you call that number in a very friendly and positive way. So that number, people call that one number. They get assessed and screened for our housing programs. Now, it's not perfect, right? Right now, we have people call. We can't necessarily say, you know, what is it that you need today, and then provide that thing. What we have is homeless housing programs. And so what we're doing is folks call, we assess them for homelessness. If they qualify, we screen them, and by we, I mean Lauren, and then they're put on their, on the list for which they're eligible. And then those folks are on those wait lists, and when those programs have openings, they call the folks on their wait list and they gradually move them into housing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the data we have on coordinated housing access, and then in a little bit I'm going to talk about how we're working on improving that system. But I don't want to talk too much because we're like right in the middle of it, and I don't want to put my foot in my mouth. But yes.
Is the program only for people who are currently homeless, or could families also call if they're going to become homeless or potentially?
So the question is, you heard it from who should call CHA? Yes, people who are currently homeless, but if you know people, families or households who are about to become homeless, have them call CHA. There's a lot of rules around what the homeless definitions are. I always encourage calling rather than not calling. So you call, CHA you can check in. They will refer you to other places if they can't serve you, probably to Home Base, which is an NHA program, Northwest Housing Alternatives program, who can help with that prevention piece when they have funding available. But I'll have a lot more to say about that when I talk about the new and improved CHA that we're working on. I should have said, we'll have a question and answer session, but if you have like really burning things, you can ask them, but because we have to do the microphone thing, I would normally just like ask whenever you want to, but let's try to keep burning ones now and then really write down your questions though, because I really want to get to them towards the end. So some information about CHA. Okay, so who is calling coordinated housing? So these are the folks who are currently sitting on our wait lists right now. These are households. Each number represents a household. So there are 120 veteran households waiting for a program. There are 196 individuals whose housing crisis is the result of domestic violence. We have a great partnership with Clackamas Women's Services in order to screen people for coordinated entry, but also screen people for CHA, but also have a way to keep their information confidential in our database system. And it's a really great partnership where Clackamas Women's Services will screen for their internal programs as well as the overall CHA programs, and then they will send that information to us so we can hold a place for those callers without using their name, so it protects their identity. Housing types, so households with adults and children, 233 of those households are waiting on wait lists right now. Households with only children, 2, that means the head of household is younger than 18. Households with only adults, 586. And individuals 62 and over, we have 67 of them sitting on a wait list waiting for programs. Can you scroll down a little bit? So let's talk about the living situation of those who were assessed. So the 2 in bold, the place not meant for habitation, I forgot I have a pointer. The place not meant for habitation, this 489 and the 49, those 2 are literally homeless destinations. They total 538, which is down here at the bottom, and are 65% of our callers. So 65% of our callers are either sleeping outside, which is really what that place not meant for habitation. It means a car, a tent on the street, under a bridge, in a park, in an abandoned building, and emergency shelter. 49 people are calling in from that. And those are mostly night by night kind of situations, but also include, hotel or motel paid for by an agency or a program. So you can, this data is for all open current people sitting on our wait lists right now. So some of these people may have called as far back as 2015 and are still waiting for a program, although I'm pretty sure we're into 2016 for almost all of our programs now, which is good. But some of these long-term permanent supportive housing programs that have, 15 beds, they don't turn over very quickly. And so folks wait for a long time on their wait lists. So that's a little bit about where people are coming from. So you can see, to the question from the audience, do people have to be homeless right now when they call? No, there are programs they can qualify for if they're right on the edge. But they should call to see where they are in that, and they will be given honest information about whether they're eligible. Ooh, look, I'm scrolling myself. Okay. This is people who exited. So I don't know if I want to get to that quite yet. Let me see. So I'll tell you a little bit more about CHA data. This is slightly older data because we pulled it in July, but it is more new than the point-in-time data. And one of the reasons I like this CHA data a little bit better than point-in-time data is it's not point-in-time. It's accumulated. Which can be challenging because some people might be sitting on a list who have resolved their housing issues. But to me, it feels like a more accurate depiction of who has experienced homelessness over the last few years. So if you look at a couple things, I'll just highlight. Households with children are more likely to be staying with friends and family than are households that don't have children. So households with children have about 58% of them are coming from literally homeless situations, and households that don't have children, it's more like almost 70% are coming from households who are literally homeless or place not meant for habitation and emergency shelter combined. We have in July we had 225 families. We had 75 youth households, which means the head of household is between the ages of 16 and 23. We had 59 households over age 62, which I think we had a more accurate data on that slide. The largest homeless population across our entire county is folks who are adults and non-chronic, meaning they don't have long-term homeless history. So they're adults with no children in the household, and they have less than a year of homeless history. So that's some general information. If you have more specific questions, that's why I brought this data sheet, to make sure I had the data available if you all had questions that I could answer from that about the actual population. So I think I'm going to move ahead and talk about our current housing initiatives. What are we doing? What do we have available? How are we getting people into those programs? So let's move on to the that other document, the housing inventory document. And while he's pulling that up, just to give you an idea, some of our permanent supportive housing programs, those long-term housing programs, have wait lists as high as 370 households waiting for a long-term housing program. And I see Jennifer nodding because it's her program that has about that many households on there. Trying to work them through. Big wait lists. So this document's pretty cool. It is available. I can make it available on the website. It is talking about what we have in Clackamas County as far as programs to serve people who are homeless. So I think I can scroll it, actually, Brian, from back here. So this intro gives a little basic information about what this document is about. I didn't really have time to edit that section to update it, but the rest of it is updated. So first we have emergency shelter. Now currently, We have 0 emergency shelter inventory in Clackamas County. It sounds like a bad thing, but we're working towards a good thing. So the reason is Annie Ross House Shelter, which many of you are aware of, that's run by Northwest Housing Alternatives, closed in June of 2017. It's being rebuilt with an entire campus rebuild, which will include additional shelter space and some significant permanent housing increases as well. So they are not open right now. However, if we look at extreme weather warming shelters, these are seasonal, usually only open in the wintertime. They open according to the weather forecast. So this year they changed that to look at the feels like weather, not just what the actual weather is. So if the National Weather Service predicts weather that feels like below 33 degrees, it will trigger the shelters to open, and they will get that word out through 211, through any social services programs. Not sure how else they get the word out like big time. I think they tell all the police officers patrolling, some other public employees out there to get the word out. It's a pretty big effort, and I wish I could do it justice by telling you all the different ways they get the word out, but it's a pretty big deal. But anyone wondering if shelters open on a given night should call 211. That's always a good way to find out. They also will open the shelters if there are other weather conditions like accumulated snowfall or high winds. So right now, I can't get it quite, but right now, Annie Ross House is serving in that capacity while they're working on moving everything out and getting everything ready to be knocked down in preparation for the big campus rebuild. And so right now they are serving as a temporary warming shelter. We also have on here Clackamas Service Center is traditionally a warming shelter. They were not a warming shelter this past year because they had a fire at their facility, which caused some damage and a lot of reconstruction and effort around that. So they are not hosting a warming center this year. There were a lot of challenges with warming centers this year, but the team at Clackamas County did a really great job pulling those together. We also have Father's Heart warming shelter here in Oregon City with a 49-bed capacity. In Moala, there's a center with a 20-bed capacity. And then the Hillside Christian Fellowship is hosting one at the Central Church of the Nazarene. It's 128-bed capacity. That's an increase. Last year, there was about a 99-bed capacity through our winter warming shelters. But despite all the challenges, they were able to get to 213 warming shelter beds this year. So the next type of housing is domestic violence housing or shelter. The two agencies in Clackamas County that do domestic violence shelter are Clackamas Women's Services and Los Niños Quinten. This is more than just shelter. These are all the services under the domestic violence category. Los Niños Quinten, Casa Hogar has 22-bed capacity. Clackamas Women's Services, CWS Shelter, is currently offline because they also demolished and rebuilt. But they are so very close to coming back, maybe about a month out or so, and they'll be back up and running. And I might have to do some adjustment to their capacity because I believe they increased their capacity with that rebuild. There's Clackamas Women's Services also has a transitional housing program and a permanent supportive housing program. The transitional housing program and the permanent supportive housing program on this list, these go through the coordinated housing or CHA process to access them. Interim housing, these are kind of our short term. I wish I could scroll this myself. I wish I could scroll this nicely. Can you just kind of center it a little bit? So that as long as the whole chart is visible, thank you. Okay, so these are two small programs. Short term, 3 to 6 months. excuse me, 3 to 6 months with case management run by, the case manager comes from Clackamas County Social Services. Can you scroll to transitional housing? Transitional housing is that 1 to 2 year type housing. We have 3 programs in the county. Jackson is our only program in the entire continuum, the entire CHA system that serves single, non-chronic adults. So remember how that group was the largest homeless group? It is one program. It has 6 beds. It's 2 years long. And they are the ones who are to be serving the largest homeless population, which is why their wait list is currently 549 households long. Yes, there are challenges. Home Safe and Springwater are both youth programs. Both for Home Safe is for homeless youth, and Home Safe is for pregnant and parenting teens, and Springwater is for single homeless youth. You can scroll to the next. All of those transitional housing programs pull off the coordinated housing or CHA wait lists. These are the rapid rehousing programs. So rapid rehousing is meant to be a program type that's tailored to the household. So it's meant to be find a household who's homeless, get them housed just as soon as you possibly can, and then work with them on a plan to keep their housing and stabilize their household. And the length of subsidy is supposed to shift based on the needs of each individual household. So if a household only really needs 3 months of rent to kind of stabilize, that's what they'll get. If a household really needs more like 6 months, then the program is meant to shift and change based on those needs. Now there are limits, right? Some programs, if somebody really needs a year of subsidy, that can be really challenging if they're already in a program. And that's why we hire really great case managers who work really hard to get households stabilized just as soon as possible. And the households themselves and the people in these programs who work their butts off to get in a stable situation because they know that subsidy can't last forever. We have several programs. The Clackamas County Rentwell Rapid Rehousing Program, it has nothing to do with the Rentwell classes. Unfortunate name similarity, but the classes you can still call to access Rentwell tenant education classes. You don't need to call the CHA number to access Rentwell tenant education classes. But for the Rapid Rehousing Program, that does go through CHA. Then there's a Veterans Rapid Rehousing Program, fairly new program. Home-based rapid rehousing for Northwest Housing Alternatives. That one can serve more than just people who are homeless right now. They have a slightly looser criteria, so that one does not pull from CHA across this list. But the next one, home-based rapid rehousing, HUD COC funded, that one does pull from the CHA wait list. So scroll down one more. Our newest rapid rehousing program is this Housing Our Families program. It serves 24 households with children. Most of our rapid rehousing programs serve primarily households with children because when this type of housing program was first introduced by HUD, that was the only population you were allowed to serve with that funding. So there's a reason why we don't have very many programs for those non-chronically homeless single adults. Many of our program components didn't let us serve that population, and I think we're seeing some shifts in being able to serve that population with some of these programs. Go ahead and scroll down to the last one. So there's no way to fit this chart in one page. These are permanent supportive housing programs. It's our biggest chunk of housing programs in the county. Again, these are almost all for single adults or couples who are chronically homeless, so long-term living outside for at least a year and have a disability. I'm not going to go over them each individually because it's just a lot of time. But Bridges to Housing is the only one that serves families with children specifically. Hope Leasing SHP2, that one can serve families with children. They're about half families with children and half single adults in their program right now. Housing Our Heroes and Veterans Rental Assistance, those two are our newest permanent supportive housing programs. They are for veterans, and Housing Our Heroes is technically called Housing Our Veterans. Sorry, I forgot to edit that. But those programs are for veterans. HAC is Housing Authority of Clackamas County, VASH. That is a program that's a combination between the Housing Authority and the VA to permanently house veterans. That is the only one on this list that does not pull from the child wait list, but everything else on this list does. And they don't pull from the child wait list yet. We'll see. So that's it for this. The rest of this document explains the Coordinated Housing Access, or CHA, but I think I've explained that program already and don't need to take the time off this document to do that. So so now I want to talk a little bit about what we're planning on doing with CHA and how we're planning on moving forward. So recently, the state granted our community action agency an additional nearly, I think, $500,000 or so. Our community action agency is run through Clackamas County Social Services, and they chose to spend about $450,000 of that money on an expansion of our CHA program. So right now, I have to be very careful because we haven't concluded who that money is going to. There was an RFP or a NOFO process, a Notice of Funding Opportunity process, where people applied for that funding, and we're in the process of evaluating those applications. But the goal is to combine people who are currently homeless, have one phone number for people who are currently homeless, people who are worried that they're going to lose their housing, like the rent is due and they're not sure how they're going to pay it, or the rent is going to be due next month and they're not sure how to pay it moving forward. So it's going to combine, and can you just close that out? I'm not ready to talk about that one yet. So it's going to combine people who are already homeless and people who are seeking prevention from being homeless. And the way we're talking about it, this additional money is, part of it is going to prevention services to prevent people from becoming homeless. Part of it is going to diversion services, which looks at people who are about to become homeless or people who are already homeless and trying to brainstorm and come up with ideas to avoid putting them on a wait list that they'll have to wait for a significant amount of time, to try to serve them immediately with whatever they might need, given their situation, given their resources, the income they may have, the family supports they may have, the friend supports they may have, and try to come up with some solution to help them get stable in housing without having them sit on a wait list and wait to come up to the top of that wait list. The third component of the additional money is for rapid rehousing services, to take folks who are homeless and try to scoop them up right away, not have them sit on a wait list for a year while they are still homeless, and put them back into a place as soon as possible and provide the least amount of services that family would need to stabilize themselves so that they can spread that service across as many people as possible. So the goal is, and the way I've kind of been talking about it, is if somebody calls the CHA line, the goal is to have an in-depth conversation about what they truly need when they're calling to resolve their housing crisis, and asking the caller to have that conversation and engage with that conversation with the CHA specialist who's answering the call. So having a way to really think through and problem solve, solving that homeless crisis before they end up in a long-term housing program or waiting for a long-term housing program. There's a question back there.
Do we have data on how many new homeless people come in every year, so that if with this prevention and diversion, would we know if 2017 we had more than we did in 2018 when we put more of a focus on prevention and diversion versus rehoming? Not versus, but in addition to?
Yes. So short answer, yes, but I don't have it on me right now. But absolutely, that's part of the benefit of this CHA system, is that we can get really good data on who's calling, what their situation is when they're calling, how it was or was not resolved, and identifying those gaps. That's really part of why this money was dedicated towards CHA in the first place, was because we know there are gaps, and because we know that we can't, right now we're not serving those people in the prevention category, and they're ending up in the homeless category. And we want to do our best to combine those systems, because they really are a couple different systems into one to help stem that flow a little bit.
Do you know how soon someone could have access to a number for 2017? So if they wanted to like set a goal for 2018?
A week? A week?
Awesome, thanks.
I wanted to mention that Home-Based Northwest Housing Alternative has been providing prevention services since 2009, and a lot of times we're not able to meet the need. We'll get 80 to 100 calls a month and only able to serve maybe 10. Oftentimes we're running out of money for some months that we're not able to catch some of those folks. So prevention funds are such a huge need in Clackamas County. Trying to prevent those folks from losing their units in the first place is so much more cost effective.
Thanks, Angela. So what Angela is talking about is not just combining the systems, but increasing the resources for those systems. I think it's going to be, it will be a big change in how we deal with homelessness in the county. Often somebody will call and they'll say their situation, they're in a desperate situation, but I hate to say it, but they're technically not homeless enough. It's terrible. It doesn't make for Lauren having a great time answering those calls and having to tell people, I'm really sorry you don't qualify yet. If you continue to be in this situation, please call back, if you find your situation worse. And it's not good for people calling. They should be able to call and get the services they need right away in one spot that will address sort of the continuum, if you will, of needs they might have. So that's what's happening with the CHA expansion. The goal is to serve at least 100 households over the next year and a half to prevent them from becoming homeless or to significantly shorten the length of time that they spend homeless. We will be working through the current wait list as well. So people sitting on wait lists right now, we will be cycling back through those folks to put them through sort of this new process to see if there's any way to resolve or solve the issue instead of them waiting for a housing program. So we will be making that effort. Another really exciting new development that Clackamas County is embarking on is the Veterans Tiny House Village. Have you all heard of this one? So this is the area that Vahid would be a much better speaker on than me. So I'll go ahead and admit that I haven't been intimately involved, but essentially the county has identified a land, and what we'll be doing is putting tiny housing pods on that land. They are currently on campus being built right that way past the parking lot, the employee parking lot. There will be, I believe the goal is to have 30 total units on that land. There'll be one individual in each of those units, and the focus is on literally homeless, so people who are living in emergency shelters or a place not meant for habitation, veterans, adults. So they are moving right along with that project. There have been many challenges. This is the first time the county has made an effort to do this kind of tiny house village. It requires a lot of intricate zoning and planning things that I am far from qualified to deeply discuss. It requires some changes to the way things have normally been done, but the county's been on I'll say brave for embarking on this, because it's a big need. It's a real, true option that I don't think many entities have considered before, to have tiny houses. They're low cost. They're a way. This project is not meant to be a permanent housing project, meaning folks are not pulled into this project given a tiny house and that's where they'll live indefinitely. The goal is to use this Vets Village similar to a shelter, in that they move in, they have a safe place to stay alive and warm and dry, and a place that when their names come up on our program list, we'll be able to find them and get them into those programs. So that is the goal of the village. Last I heard, they were going to, the goal was to open in February, sometime in February, maybe March. It's very challenging. They've got a lot of things to put in place, but the goal is to have this project be a little bit of a pilot, in that they will get it in place, move people in, and then it's something that could potentially be replicated in another place. So what they're trying to do is not just work around rules, but shift the system a little bit to make it easier to do this kind of project in the future. So yes, it's taking more time than anyone anticipated, but I think it will end up saving time in the future as we move forward with these kinds of projects. Folks who are interested in being screened to see if they're eligible for the Vets Village should call the CHA line. And again, that's 503-655-8575. So if you're interested in being screened for the Vets Village, call that phone number. We don't have the screening quite in place yet, but what Erin and I will be doing is, once the Vet Village is ready to open their wait list, we're going to search through anyone who's been screened historically through CHA who may qualify for that program and add them to that wait list and give them the option of that program. So anyone who calls in CHA, please feel free to, so if they're interested in the Vets Village, they should call CHA and they will get pulled into that program if they're eligible. So last but certainly not least, because it gives all the rest of our programs in Continuum a little relief and hope, Chuck, the director of the Housing Authority and Community Development, is going to talk to you a little bit about the efforts they're making to redevelop and add housing units.
All right, Abby, terrific job with an hour and a half preparation, so thank you very much. So if we could bring up that other slide. While he's doing that, let me just give you a little bit more information on the vet housing. So the pods are completed. We built 15 out here, and the plan is to relocate them to this site. This is off of Jennifer Avenue, which is just south of 224, behind the Fred Meyer's warehousing area. It's in an industrial area. Not the ideal location, but it's a location that we own, as the county owned, and that we could actually move the houses to. And if you're going to ask a jurisdiction to put in something like this, it's always nice if the county can step up and say, here, we're going to do it first. So that's the plan. Now, it's also probably not the permanent location, I think, but we want to get something in place first. So those pods would be moved the end of February. While that's going on, we've got community rooms that we're purchasing or leasing modular commercial buildings, and those are being remodeled. Those will also then be moved out sometime in February, at the beginning of March, and the plan is to have everything come together around the middle of March. So it takes a long time. Even a tiny houses project takes a long time. Try a different one. Doesn't seem to work any different. But you can probably hear me if I didn't have it. So anyway, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the housing development pipeline that's going on at the Housing Authority. I know that there's been some articles about what's going on. and I'd like to say about half of that was correct. But so here what we have is a list. On the left-hand side in blue, those are the projects that we have in the pipeline. That means that they're either, in some form of development or pre-development. Starting at the top, Rosewood Terrace. This is the largest housing project that we will have ever undertaken as the Housing Authority. It's 212 units. It's located off of Audie Road, right behind Walmart. Very close to the Fuller Road light rail station. It's going to be 212 units. It's available 100% to people at or below 60% of the area median income. So, what does that mean in terms of costs? Well, I think you saw that for a one bedroom, what was it, about $1,100? We're going to be able to do a one bedroom for $766. At the 60%. And we've got two bedrooms, they're going to be at $917. So these are the units that are affordable to people that are making 60%. They're the ones that are doing the jobs that they're only paying minimum wage. So that's the plan there. The Pleasant Avenue, this is a VETS housing project. Northwest Housing Alternatives is the developer on this. This is an unusual project for us. First time we've ever done anything like this. We're going to have a project developed by a nonprofit, and then it's going to be turnkey to the Housing Authority. That means NHA will develop it. The Housing Authority will own, operate, and maintain it. That is 24 units for veterans. It's going to have VASH vouchers in it and Section 8 vouchers, and I'm happy to say that looks like we've received all the funding we need from the state to get that built. So I don't really have a timeline on that. So as I told Brenda Durbin, the Director of Social Services, well, it's real. We better sit down and figure out how we're going to provide services. Because as I've said, the easy thing to do is to build housing. The hard thing is to provide the services that allow the residents to be successful. The third one, this is in real pre-development, Housing and Human Services, Health, Housing and Human Services, particularly behavioral health, has owned a piece of property on Champion Way in Sandy for about 10 years. We were going to build a clinic there. And if you wait long enough, ties come back in style, and the idea of building a new clinic in Sandy has finally come back around saying we need a new clinic in Sandy. So the plan is to build a clinic, but let's do a clinic and housing on top. So that's kind of the plan. So we've been working with the city. They're very excited about it. The zoning fits. So we're just kind of looking at funding for that. So that one's in pre-development, but it's at least something that I think is a real possibility. Everything to the right are the public housing stock of Clackamas County, and that's the one I really wanted to talk about because that's the one that really seems to have picked up the most news. So a little bit of background. Housing Authority of Clackamas County was started in 1938. We're the first housing authority in the state. First public housing project in the state is Clackamas Heights. It's about 20 acres, 100 units, built in about 1941. 1942, 20 acres, 100 units, that was Hillside Park. That's in Milwaukee, across the street from Providence Hospital. 1960, we built Oregon City View Manor. That's just up the hill on Holcomb Boulevard from Clackamas Heights in Oregon City. And then in around 1974-ish, we built the tallest building in Clackamas County, 9 stories, public housing, Hillside Manor. In addition, we have about 145 units of scattered sites. I give you a little bit of that history just so that you get a feel for the age of this housing. Particularly the Clackamas Heights, Hillside Park, that was housing that was built, intended to be housing for families of our veterans. And it was built to their standards, but not really expected to be available 80 years later. We're having a hard time continuing to keep up with the maintenance, and particularly the capital improvement needs of those buildings. We did a study that said, what would it take to maintain all 545 public housing units for the next 20 years. It came out to about an investment of $2.4 million a year. Housing Authority receives about $800,000 a year for maintenance. So, we're in a downward spiral. We're able to maintain it, but we're just one real big system failure away. And what I mean by that, the roofs all went on at the same time. If those roofs all go, we don't have the money to maintain them. Public housing can't incur debt, so I just can't go to the bank and get a loan and fix this. I have to look at other sources. So we're looking at this housing stock that's aging, and we're looking at the number of people we can help and the number of people that we want to help. Abby threw up a chart that showed that there was about 80,000 units regionally short of what is needed. In Clackamas County, can even be a little bit more specific. At the 60% or lower, we have over 15,000 households that either are in housing that's unaffordable or aren't in housing at all. We have 545 public housing units, so we've got a gap. We talked about the wait list. We opened up the wait list. We had 8,000 people get on the wait list, and it was only open a week. We were able to pull 500 names for Section 8 and about 2,000 names for public housing. And that doesn't mean it's 2,000 separate people. It's 2,000 names that were put on wait lists, because you could go up to 3 wait lists at public housing. So there's a great need out there. So I'm going to talk about Oregon City View Manor. That's the one that was in the paper. It was built in the 60s. It's it looks like barracks housing, as does all the public housing in Clackamas County. That property has a slope of about 100 feet from the west end all the way to the east end. So it's nice view. That's why they call it. In terms of developability, we're not able to put as many units on there as we would like to. We have it's about 22 acres. We got 100 units now. We need more units. So we decided that the best thing for us to do was to look at selling that. Now, we don't get to just sell public housing property. We have to go through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and ask their permission. It's a long process. But once that's done, we're in a position to where we can sell the property, take the funds generated from the sale, and invest that in new construction. We anticipate that we could get around $12 million from the sale of Oregon City View Manor. Right now, if we want to build a 60-unit affordable housing project, it costs about $16 million. That money usually comes from the state through what's called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. But there's always a gap. State will give you so much, you'll go after so many other fund sources, but there's a gap of around $1 to $2 million. And it's that gap money that the Housing Authority doesn't have. That's what we're able to do if we sell Oregon City View Manor. If you take that $12 million, divide that by $1.5 million, just as an average gap, that's 8 projects that we could build. So that's 8 projects of 60 units apiece that money could be leveraged. So we could turn 100 units into 480 units. That's the reason we're doing this. The question that always comes up is, well, what about the people that live there? What's going to happen to them? Well, the program we're looking at, HUD Section 18, which is part of the regs, says that if you sell a property underneath this program, every single occupied unit is eligible for a Section 8 voucher. So that's what we get in return. And the individuals aren't left to their own to just go out and find units. We actually have a relocation consultant that works closely with them, finds out what do they need, where do they want to go, and then helps them find a unit. Nobody is homeless as a result of this. Everybody will find a unit. We did some survey work, and what we found is about half the people that we surveyed really excited about getting that Section 8 voucher because they want to move someplace else. They don't want to necessarily live in Oregon City. They may want to live someplace else in the county. Great thing about this voucher is if you've got family in California that you want to move to, you can take that voucher and move to California with it. We'll only help you move so far, but I doubt that we will move you all the way to California. But if you wanted to stay in Clackamas County, so you had family in Canby and you wanted to move your family there, we pay for that move. So we don't, our number one priority are the residents that are there now. So we'll take care of them. So anyway, and then this 40 new units, what that means is that we've got 22 acres up there. We're going to sell most of that to on the fair market. So we're just going to sell it to whoever wants to buy it. But we're going to hold some of those acres, 3 to 5 acres. And on that, this is we're gonna of course, since we already own it, we're gonna take the stuff that's flat so that we can build on. And what we want to do is we want to build about 30 to 40 units back on that property. So individuals that do want to come back can come back. We have a lot of other projects going on. The Hillside Manor. So I'd mentioned Section 18 is a way to dispose of property. Under Hillside Manor, we're using what's called RAD, Rental Assistance Demonstration. I told you that public housing can't incur debt, and that will never change. That's statutory. However, under the RAD program, we can get out from under those statutory requirements, and now we can go out and go after a low-income housing tax credit so that we can generate money so that we can remodel that building. The manor, even though it's old, still got good bones. I mean, it's a concrete building. It's solid. It meets seismic standards. It's worth maintaining, but it's old. It hasn't been, like me, it hasn't gone through a lot of improvements and remodels, and that's what we'd like to do with the manor. So we have just been approved by HUD as a RAD applicant, and we're in the process of designing those improvements. So our goal is to keep those units and maintain them over the next couple of years. Property next to that is Hillside Park. As I said, that's about 16 acres, 100 units, built in 1942. Those units are also tired. Our plan with that, as we've received a RAD application with that, we're going to keep that property, but we're going to do a neighborhood plan. We received a grant from Metro for about $225,000. We're going to pull the community together, the residents, the city, the service district, the fire department, the police department, the surrounding neighbors. We're going to find out what could that 16 acres look like. If we knocked everything down, what would it look like? And there's a lot of excitement about this. The plan is to take that 100 units and build 400 new units on that property. So it'll be a combination of multifamily, the row houses. There may be some single family homes in there. So there's potential is great. And we've got a terrific support from the city of Milwaukee to do this. So they are all in and can't wait to see that happening. So that plan is something that we will start on probably here in the next 3 or 4 months. Last property is Clackamas Heights. It's our oldest, and everybody says, well, how come you're not selling that one first? To be honest, is that it's because that's where the housing authority offices are. And I can't knock down that property until I have a place to relocate the offices to. So the sale at Oregon City View Manor, the improvements at Hillside Park, we may relocate there. One of the things that we do need to do with Clackamas Heights, though, is we need to do another plan. And in that plan, it may be that the housing authority stays on that site someplace. So anyway, it all ties together. What you see down here, these numbers, we set a goal. Board of County Commissioners said that they understood the housing crisis. They understood what the housing authority needed to do. The requirement is that if you demolish a housing authority property, a public housing unit, you have to replace it 1-to-1. Well, that's not much of a goal. So the board set a goal of 4-to-1. So for every affordable public housing unit we lose, we're going to build 4 new affordable units. So when you look at that, take that 545, take out the manor, because we're keeping that. That means we have a production goal of 1,780 units. When you look at everything that we've added up here, we've got 1,004 units kind of in the pipeline and planned. That means we're 776 units short of our goal. And I'm confident that we've got these 40 units. I mentioned that we can build 480 units just from the sale of Oregon City View Manor. Now all of a sudden, you know, we're 200 or 300 units away, and we're going to add probably more units here and more units there. Plus, there will be other projects that we work with our nonprofit partners, because this isn't just a housing authority. This is the housing authority plan, but we're not going to develop all of this. We don't have the capacity. We're going to work with Northwest Housing Alternatives. We're going to work with Central City Concern and Reach and all of those other those nonprofit developers. PEDCOR, who's doing Rosewood Terrace. They're a for-profit affordable housing developer. We're going to work with them, and we're going to find a way to increase the number of units that we have in Clackamas County. So I just wanted to move, that was it. I wanted to move really quick through that. And now I want to open it up to questions. And please wait for the microphone. So if you've got a question, raise your hand. There's one over here.
I was noticing at the far side, it says scattered sites, 145 units. And I was wondering, is there any possibility that there might be development in the Canby area or any plans in that area?
Okay, so for the scattered sites, those are typically single-family homes. And we're not quite sure what we're going to do with those. You know, they're the most expensive to maintain just because they're spread throughout the county, but they're also our best housing units, and it meets one of our goals, which is kind of the deconcentration of housing and low-income housing. Right now, 75% of all public housing is in Milwaukee and Oregon City, so we need to spread it. But to answer the question, it's the scattered sites. You know, we may buy some more scattered sites, but more than likely we're going to be developing small units like this, 24 units, and Canby's an area that we want to build in.
Good.
Canby, Molalla, Estacada, Sandy. We need to move out, because I don't think that Canby wants 212 units. I don't think they could handle 212 units. But 50 units, 60 units, 24 units, that's the perfect size. So we're going to try to right size this, and the goal is to get housing throughout the county. So other questions?
So Chuck, will you talk a little bit about the housing needs assessment that is going on, and will you also include in that the economic part of it?
Sure. So somebody got on, well, it's actually my asset manager has this little sign, gentleman, on there, and it says, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And what we get a lot is, well, this is Chuck's opinion on what we need. And I think it's right, because I've been doing this a long time, but we need data. And so in order to do that, we're in the process of contracting with the consultant to do a housing needs assessment for the entire Clackamas County. Now, this is a little unique. People do housing needs assessment all the time. In fact, Milwaukee just did one. What we're looking at doing, though, is a housing needs assessment that is for the entire county and breaks out all the individual cities. So the individual cities are going to be able to pull the chapter out that says, Canby, what do I need? And that information is going to be there. So, and it goes beyond just looking at, you know, how many units do you need, what's the demographics. We're also going to be looking at kind of the economics. the economic growth, the economic impact. We're not just looking at what do the lowest income people need, but we're also going to look at what does a middle income person need. You've got somebody making median income, they'd like to be a home buyer. Okay, so you're making $75,000 a year. That's a terrific wage. Can you afford a $350,000 home? So, that's not affordable. So how do we assist those individuals with affordability and home buyers? So it may be that we go away from McMansions and go to the common wall, townhouses. Maybe we go to cottage clusters. So there's lots of opportunities. And if we open those up, we build those families that are now living in those apartments, that they can afford, move out, which opens up the resource a little bit more. Now, any other questions on the economics? Did I get at what you needed?
So one of the issues that we have in Clackamas County is that we have a lot of low-paying jobs. That's really part of the problem. We have a lot of jobs that are minimum wage. We have a lot of jobs that pay $12 an hour. We have very few jobs that pay more than $50,000 a year. And as you just noted, when you take a household making $60,000 a year and the houses being built are costing $450,000, that's not affordable. So I believe we're going to be looking in this survey at what each community also has for jobs and what those jobs are paying. Correct?
That is correct. One of the interesting arguments or conversations we had at the coordinating committee for Clackamas County was the difference between housing affordability and affordable housing. It sounds like it's how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. It's that kind of a conversation. But really what it breaks down to when we talk affordable housing, affordable to low-income people. Housing affordability is affordable housing that's affordable to anybody that wants to live in Clackamas County. So that's the part of the work that's going to be done. We've received 2 applications, and I would expect that a decision will be made here in about a week as to who we want to go to. We'll present this back to the coordinating committee and just kind of give them a feel for, what we think we should do. So, but we're still we're still at least a month and a half out just from getting a contract.
Hi, are you spending any time talking to transportation people? I happen to be on one of the metro transportation committees, and we're looking at our regional transportation plan, and housing is always an issue. And when you put people in housing areas where there's no transportation, they can't get to jobs, they can't get to services, and all the other things that they need. So is there a close, I hope, because I've been encouraging the transportation people to talk to housing people. So I'm going to talk to you to encourage you to talk to transportation people to do some collaboration so that you're not building housing where there's no transportation, and the transportation people are not putting new transportation where there's no housing.
You make a great point. And that's been one of the problems, particularly with the aging public housing that we have now. It was just placed where land was available, and where we could get support. We've only been, I think, part of Oregon City for 10 or 15 years. I mean, that Park Place neighborhood was just annexed, not too long ago. So we're really concerned about placing housing in what we call opportunity areas. And those opportunity areas are near good schools, near services, near transit. Transit becomes a key component of that. So for things like, Rosewood Terrace, that one is, we just kind of reacted to a proposal, but this proposal works great because it's so close to transit. When we start talking about the Clackamas Heights plan and the Hillside Park plan, that's where we need to bring in the transportation people so that we can then find out, what what they're interested, what they would like to see, what they need, and that'll allow us to then begin the conversation of future growth on their part. So as we start to look in other areas, we can make sure that we're connected with transportation. So the answer is, we're not there yet. We know that there's a connection, but we're working toward that. More questions? You know, I can't give you the exact number, but you know, we are one of the faster growing counties in the state. No, you're right, and the housing crisis, the homeless crisis, it's not a Clackamas County problem. You know, it's a countrywide problem. And the solution isn't just going to be found in Clackamas County. It's got to be found in the regional efforts that, you know, that we've got in place to deal with both. So, you know, there's been a lot of housing construction in Multnomah County. Now, people are saying, well, that's great. Multnomah County is getting all of this great housing. But, you know, what we found is that as the housing goes up in Multnomah County, those Multnomah County residents that are living in Clackamas County, because that's what they could find and afford, move out. If they move out, that opens up units for us. There's been this downward pressure. You know, people that are, you know, can afford to live anywhere aren't finding units. So they press down into those units that normally they wouldn't be interested in, but that's all that's available. But that's also the units that are available to our low-income families. So if we can start to relieve that pressure at the top, it allows more mobility up, and it opens our housing options to more people. Question over here. And while that is coming up, let me just mention something that Abby said about the wait lists, you know, opening, and that hadn't been open for quite a while. Part of the problem of the reason the wait list had been closed for so long, we hadn't pulled anything for a year, is because housing was so expensive here that we were having to spend more money for our vouchers than we normally would. Voucher, you know, it took me a while to learn this. Voucher isn't a piece of paper. Voucher is money. And HUD says, we're going to give you so much money, and you should be able to help so many people. Well, it used to be that the voucher went farther. So we, instead of just helping one person per voucher, we could help 1.2 people. We were spending less money on the units, so that means every 5 vouchers or 4 vouchers, we could help one additional person. Well, now we're helping 0.8 people a voucher. That means we're having to spend more. HUD projected that we were going to spend more money than they were going to give us, so we had to quit issuing the vouchers. Now we're going to be in that problem again, because that's just the cycle that we're in. But here, you know, in the next couple of months, we are going to rent up like crazy. We're going to get as many vouchers out the door as we possibly can, because there's a backload. So that's part of the reason we're doing that. So if you have, if you know of people, if you're on a preference wait list, talk to the housing authority. Tony Carter is the housing coordinator, or it's my housing services manager, and she can help you with that. We're going to get those out the door as quickly as possible, because HUD's going to slam it on us probably in March. So I'm sorry, you had a question? So I told you it takes a long time to get a project going. I've been working on Rosewood Terrace now for almost 3 years. We're going to put a shovel in the dirt in March. Everything else, assuming everything is good, it's a 30-month construction process, but there's 6 buildings. So we anticipate that in March of 2019 that the first building is going to be done with all of the services that need to be in, and we'll start a partial lease up at that time. That's correct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. And even staff who run programs sometimes aren't 100% sure when CHA is a good referral. So the question, should I repeat the question? Do you think it got picked up? So when is CHA a good referral? So generally what I say is call. because the whole way CHA is set up is to assess for the very minimal qualifications first. So ideally, they would ask 1 or 2 questions. Where'd you sleep last night? How long can you stay there? And be able to determine pretty quickly whether this person is eligible for CHA programs right now. So call, and they'll do it quickly. And if not, then they will refer you or do a warm handoff to a resource that can help talk you through the other options. Now, when we do our CHA redesign, which I have a hard time setting a timeline on, but I think should be in place at least by end of spring, then the floodgates open. Then there's way more things you're eligible for by calling CHA in the first place. So part of what I was trying to get out was don't limit who's calling CHA, and I want people to know that there will be a significant increase in resources and the situations that people are in that we will be able to serve moving forward in not too distant future.
Okay, so what I might guide somebody in is like when you call this number, they're going to want to know, are you going to be homeless? And so they're doubled up in, father-in-law's household with a new baby, and it's very stressful. And so I have this conversation with them. It's like, is this stable? Are you likely to get kicked out next week? So I'm telling them, be really forthcoming about that when you talk.
Yeah.
So in a scenario like that, how is that being assessed?
So the HUD, there's 3 different HUD definitions of homelessness. One is literal homelessness, which I've pretty much covered, the emergency shelter, place not meant for habitation. The other one is called imminent risk of homelessness. So if the person, they call CHA, the CHA person will talk to them about how long they think they can stay. Is it any day father-in-law could have a blow up and they have to move out? Is the relationship so strained that it could be a domestic violence type relationship, which, as we all know, includes more than just physical violence and includes a whole gamut of control tactics, right, Angie? Okay, good. So that opens up a third level of homeless eligibility. If someone is fleeing domestic violence, they have to leave their stable housing situation because they fear for their personal safety and the safety of their family, then that's another qualification, in which case we would offer the opportunity for them to be screened by CWS, who can wrap around other supports. So generally people are calling, we're asking some basic questions. If we find that they meet one of those homeless definitions, then we'll move forward with a more in-depth screening and get them on wait lists. Otherwise, we will offer CWS if they're identify as fleeing DV, or we will offer to continue the survey ourselves if they're comfortable with that. We give them both options and explain the benefits. It's really important that people are honest when they call the Coordinated Housing Access Line. And I want to just say, like, people are just trying to get their needs met. When I say honest, I don't necessarily mean that people are calling and lying about their situation. What I think people are doing is they're calling and they're portraying their situation in the light that they think is most likely to get them services because they're in need, or they wouldn't be calling in the first place. They'd be able to solve it themselves. So we encourage people to be really truthful about their actual situation and answer those questions as close to reality as possible, because if they end up on a wait list because they sort of shifted the conversation a little bit to make it sound like they were more likely to get kicked out than not, they come to the top of that wait list and then they have to rescreen and they have to provide verification at that point and they won't qualify. So you're sitting on a wait list for who knows how long for a program that you don't actually qualify for, that doesn't get you into the program. So there does need to be documented proof of a homeless situation when someone gets to the top of that wait list, which is why we're trying to build these other supports in so people don't feel like they need to shift their story to get their needs met, so that we can say, what is your need, and try to meet it right away without waiting for a wait list and without saying, here's what we have, let's see how you fit into that, as opposed to here's what you need, let's see how our programs can work with that need.
So I work with transition age youth, and I have a lot of youth who come to me when they either like have just gotten into a housing crisis or they've been in one for a while, and I'm just the first person they're seeing. And so I'll always have them call the CHA first, but then they'll usually just get put on a waiting list for Springwater, and there's only 7 beds. And so if I can't like do planning with them to get them to stay with a friend or something like that, I'll usually end up like having them call Harry's mother or send them into Portland to Janice or one of the adult emergency shelters. So I guess my question is, are there any resources I'm missing for youth? And then do you think there's a need for more resources for young people from what you're seeing?
Okay, so a couple questions there. So what you're describing this, okay, you have a housing crisis right now, we'll call the CHA, get you on a wait list, but now we'll try to solve what's happening now and try to get you to a safe place so that when your name does come up on that wait list, you can enter that program, or we can solve the housing crisis before your name comes up on the wait list. Right, exactly. A safe situation in the meantime. And that is an excellent description of what we're trying to build into CHA. So we're trying to say, listen, if I screen you for a housing program right now, you're going to be on a wait list. That's not going to help you today. Let's think of what else might help. You asked about additional resources that you're missing right now, the resources that you're missing. I think what's happening right now, we're in this moment where we have a certain amount of formal resources and they exist. We know what they are. The community is pretty well versed in what they are. We've tried to make them easier to access through CHA and other means, but it's challenging, but they're there. What we're really looking at is out-of-box thinking at this point, outside of the box. And so CHA brainstorming. Well, is there a friend or a family who wouldn't take you before, but maybe if they get $50 a month to help with utilities, they might be willing to take you? Or what if we can also help you get into this education program? And they're like, well, I only want to have you living in my place if you're in school or working. Well, can we get that in place? Can we help you to move that position? So we're not talking about additional formal supports. We're talking about flexible funding that can help with out-of-the-box thinking. And that is the goal of CHA. And anyone who is interested in helping us think through that process as we move through this, I'm happy to take your information and add you to our regular quarterly CHA feedback meeting to help us think through this process and whether we're being effective. Because we're not going to do a whole process and not be effective. We're going to keep shifting it and working at it until we can actually see a difference being made with the callers who come in. The question about additional youth services, right now our wait list for the Home Safe Pregnant and Parenting Teens is 17 people long, 17. Our wait list for Springwater is 7 people long. So given the comparison between those wait lists and our one program for a non-chronic single adults has 549 people. Our permanent supportive housing programs generally are looking at 200 to 300 people. I would say it's unlikely that new funding that we apply for our existing funding sources will specifically focus on youth. But any one person on that wait list is too many people. And so obviously it's not enough to serve who we're serving. And so if an opportunity arose where there was specific youth funding that we could go after, we would look at that opportunity.
Do you really think that you're legitimately, accurately assessing the needs of youth in our community? I mean, so many of them, people are willing to take them in and put them on the couch for a while. So those people may not be calling.
Yeah.
They're in their cars. They're not telling you that they need services, but they are out there, and they are out there in the hundreds. A wait list of 17 and 7 does not correlate with what my current information is working with youth.
So the other thing to keep in mind with youth is the fact that they are so savvy on, there are a couple things. That's a good point too. They're often so savvy at finding a couch to crash on, a friend to stay with, a friend's parents who are willing to take them in, and they're hopping around. They are not HUD qualified homeless at that point. So the numbers I have are HUD qualified homeless. This is again why we're building in this additional upfront part of CHA, where they can say, you don't just call if you're homeless. You call if you are in any kind of housing crisis, and we are willing to work with you. I've heard of some really awesome youth programs that step in that pre-homeless, but really homeless, but not technically HUD homeless field. Second Home is a new program out of Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon. It's a matching program that helps youth find a place to stay, people who agree to house them and to support them. We have a great youth organization in Clackamas County called the Inn. They do some of that as well. Forget what that program is called, but they will match youth as well. So no, I think youth is a unique population. They're very savvy at trying to avoid sleeping outside on the street, which is great because they're vulnerable when they're out there. I think that the numbers we're getting is a small piece, especially of that population. It's probably not too far off those youth who have run out of all the other options and are regularly sleeping outside. But we do rely on our youth partners to help us think through that, because no one is an expert in every field. And so again, I welcome youth partners to help us think through that and help us get to those youth better, reach them better. We are absolutely willing to do additional outreach and try to reach populations that are underserved. But we can't serve them if they don't call. I think we're just going to take this one last question since it is actually noon.
Aging Services heard a presentation recently about, and I've forgotten what they call it, is where people that currently live in a home, but they are willing to take a roommate.
Home share.
Home share, thank you. There are so many programs, I can't possibly remember them all. But I'm not hearing that being promoted. And it seems to me that is a really potentially positive program for seniors especially.
We are looking at all kinds of options to help with this homeless crisis. Not everyone could be served by a homeless program. We have limited capacity. Not everyone can find a couch to crash on their own. There's limited capacity. So one exciting field, which is kind of interesting because there's this concept of doubled up, and that's always been an undesirable housing situation, doubling up with another household. We're at a point now where for some of the population, doubling up is the goal. That's a way to solve the housing crisis for some folks. So there are several ideas around roommating type situations, one of which is Metro Home Share. This is a program also out of Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon. They had a program called Shared Housing for a number of years. It was underfunded, and they lost funding in, I want to say, 2008 or 9, and it was offline for that period of time, and now it's back. So what this program does is it takes homeowners who either just want the company of a roommate, or they need help paying property taxes or other bills, or they need chores done around the house, or they need help with child care, or they need help with cooking and cleaning and basic stuff to allow them to stay in their home for longer, as in the case of many older adults. And so this program matches renters or people who need a place to live with homeowners who have a spare room and could use the help, and then they help them come up with a mutually agreeable contract that spells out what rent will physically be paid, what rent will be paid through chores, or other things. So it allows a homeowner to hopefully get the support they need to stay in their home, and it allows a renter to get affordable renting and good rental history. They will also look at renters who have permission from their landlord to take on another 1 or 2 people in their household, and work with the landlord and the renter to roommate within rental environments too. I would love to explore roommating on a grand scheme. I would love to look at people who are sitting on our child wait list who might be willing to, combine efforts with somebody else on the wait list and look at working together to afford rent. I think our society went from lots of sharing to keep everything personal and everyone has their own stuff, and we're sort of swinging back to maybe we need to share housing and cars and such to get by. And so everything is part of the solution. Really, every little bit. Not everyone wants to be a roommate. Not everyone can. And so, but I see that as a huge part of the potential solution. All right, one more.
So, can you hear me? Okay. Going back to the programs that you mentioned earlier, transitional housing, rapid housing, for families that are going through a housing crisis, as you mentioned, they also will need to call the hotline to get into any of those programs. Okay, just wanted to clarify that.
When in doubt, call CHA. If you're in the wrong place, they will get you to the right place. Because you can't get into those wait lists without it. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Please don't forget to do your evaluations. Thanks for being here.